So here are the skill sets. First one is emotional literacy. I have a whole course on emotional literacy. What we're going to do is we're going to teach the client to get back in touch with their emotions, to process those emotions, to honor those emotions as a part of themselves, as a way of making them stronger. We're going to reteach the client, if you are the client, we're going to reteach you that your emotions are not something to be fearful of, but they are messengers who are bringing you messages that are there to support you, even though those messages and the messenger can be annoying or frightening or disruptive. Its purpose is a positive intent. And if we turn our attention, our present-centered awareness to the message and hear the message, it will stop that from happening. So that's the emotional literacy side of the course that we're going to delve into. We're going to teach the client mental toughness. The psychological term would be resilience. CPTSD and long-term trauma over a long enough timeline can make people, they can still be tough to all intents and purposes. They can take a lot of pain, they can deal with a lot of stuff. It can make us, CPTSD sufferers like myself, vulnerable to strange things and to unusual triggers. And it's very, very common for people with CPTSD to be told, oh wow, I can't believe that you can put up with this, this and this, and that you work so many hours and you can do this, this and this. But then in another area of life, they're like, what's wrong with you? Why can't you deal, like you can deal with 2 years of this horror, but you can't deal with 2 minutes of that, which everybody seems to be able to deal with. There is a lack of resilience on certain key issues. People with CPTSD, because of the splitting in the inner child, can be extremely resilient, extremely mentally tough with certain subjects, and then another subject, usually pertaining to issues of self-identity or emotional intimacy, have very low levels of resilience to stress. And that can manifest as, because of the low resilience to stress on those trigger issues, it will either manifest as emotional flashbacking, or it can go into people becoming very, very defensive to the point of hostility, and it almost looks like they're seeking conflict. They're not. They're actually trying to protect their perceived vulnerabilities from a perceived threat, just in a very non-direct way, and in an ineffectual way. There's an interesting piece of English. In an ineffectual way. Self-praise is no praise at all, they say, but I think this is probably the most powerful part of the course. I'm surprised that nobody's come up with it before, but the reparenting process, I'm not going to talk about it much here. I'm just going to let that section speak for itself. In essence and in principle, what we're going to be looking at is taking that archetype, that recording of the bad parent that is inside of the client, and we're going to change it into a good and loving parent, and then we're going to reinstall it. Talking about people like their computers and like these are pieces of software, and that's quite deliberate. That's kind of how this process is going to work and how that's going to look. We're going to look at state management. Most of the people who show up with CPTSD, we tend to abandon ourselves, we tend to abandon our own needs, and that means that we're not taking care of ourselves properly, and that we don't look internally even to see what our state is. Most of us are not even aware that we can influence. We can do things that would influence our state and make ourselves feel better. Why does this happen? Probably because in childhood we would have been punished for having needs. We would have been punished for saying, hey, I'm hungry, hey, I'm thirsty. Punished so severely that over time the child simply learns, you're not allowed to have feelings. You're not allowed to feel thirsty or hungry. You're not allowed anything at all. And so teaching state management is a good way of teaching the individual to notice that they have a state, and secondly, that they can do things for themselves that will help them. When people have hangovers, when people are drunk, when people are abusing narcotics, when people are not sleeping properly, when they're not eating properly, when they're not exercising properly, when they're in a bad physical state, they're way more vulnerable to the recordings of the inner critic. They're way more vulnerable to emotional flashbacks. This then makes them feel badly about themselves. They feel badly about the world. They do bad things because they're focused on negative things, and they produce a lot more chaos and shit for themselves. It comes back around and they go, see, I knew the world was a shitty place and I was a shitty person, and it becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy. The state management is a really, really good way of breaking that cycle and going, hey, you totally don't have to do that anymore. There are other things you can do that are going to make you feel better, like night and day, between today and tomorrow. I mean, there's no reason. All of this is fast. The emotional literacy is probably the slowest. it's going to take, there's exercises in here that will probably, you should, conservatively be expecting to be doing for the next 3 months for them to fully work. Mental toughness, well, a large part of that is listening to an audio hypnosis, 7 days and you will be mentally tougher. Reparenting, a longer one, maybe not 3 months, maybe months to 6 weeks. State management, instant, listen to it, like literally listen to a piece of advice and then go, fuck, I could totally do that whilst I'm listening to the piece of advice to make myself feel better. Yes, you can breathe deeper, smile, stand up, stretch your back. Straightening the back feels good to humans. Lifting the head feels good. Doing this with your face feels good. Drinking water feels good. You could totally do that whilst listening to me doing all the other stuff. The critical thinking, I've called it critical thinking because I wanted it to sound normal. Like layman's terms, the more psychobabbly way of describing it would be teaching people to have boundaried thinking. In this bad model of reality, this bad parent is smashing the boundaries of the child as they're supposed to be developing and causing this unboundaried sort of shrunken person to be here. So there's very, very few boundaries going on. Now, where should the boundaries be developing? What boundaries is the parent smashing? The boundaries that should be developing is the child should be learning the difference between my need and your need, for one. That's one thing. But the parent imposes the needs upon the child so that the child grows up into an adult who, whenever they're in an intimate relationship, because your intimate sexual relationships with people are going to reflect most deeply the relationship you had with your parent. In the psychology world, that's called attachment trauma. So it's love trauma. Attachment is just love. And in psychoanalysis, they'll say attachment to first object. The first object, I don't know why psychoanalysis chose these terms, but the first object is the parent, primal object, parent. Attachment to object is loving, in normal speak, is loving mummy and loving daddy.